the state, by not using, the Rohingyas, name, is arguing that they are not a protected group, under the Genocide, Convention.
Hello, and welcome to episode 62 of What's Happening in Myanmar, a weekly show from the Frontier Myanmar podcast family. I'm your host, Luke Corbin. It's Friday, January 23, and today we are doing a deep dive interview with Seng, a human rights advocate from Myanmar. We'll be talking about the ongoing case brought by the Gambia to the International Court of Justice, accusing Myanmar of breaking the United Nations 1948 Genocide Convention for its atrocities against the Rohingya people. It's a bit of a long one. I really hope you enjoy it. But before we get to it, I'll quickly cover the most important updates regarding the military's so-called elections, which are soon to be over. So, the military-appointed Union Election Commission, the UEC, has announced that voting won't take place in Kachin State's Momal and Mansi townships, which are largely controlled by the Kachin Independence Army, the KIA. That's for the final phase of the so-called elections which are being held this Sunday. This brings the total number of townships where the election has been cancelled, total for all three phases, to 65 out of a total of 330. The UEC also announced this week that the election on Sunday will not be held in 10 urban wards and 1 village tract in Bamor Township, also in Kachin State. Now, Bamor encompasses a total of 16 urban wards and 42 village tracts. The KIA has been besieging and battling for Bamor since December 2024. A Bamor resident told media outlet Democratic Voice of Burma that fighting there is continuing, which calls into question whether the military will be able to hold the election in those remaining 6 urban wards at all. The source said that the KIA has been launching daily attacks on military positions in the town and that the military has been conducting continuous airstrikes. Other areas where the election will be held on Sunday are also far from peaceful or stable. For example, Mandalay Region's Daunta Township. There, the Myanjan District People's Defence Force ambushed a military convoy near Padak Sagon village just on Sunday. But however the military's elections finally conclude in these conflict-affected areas and elsewhere, the regime is pretty much certain to bestow a victory to its proxy party, the Union Solidarity and Development Party. And most resistance groups will continue their armed struggle against military rule, which was largely reignited by the 2021 coup. Now, if you want more details about the election results up to date, and so much more, check the daily briefing newsletters out, which are sent to Frontier Myanmar members. If you're not a member, please remember that Frontier relies on people like you, people who really care about what's happening in Myanmar. Frontier relies on you to make ends meet and support our journalists and staff. We couldn't do it without you. There's 3 levels of membership available, from as little as $10 a month. Frontier offers regular online and in-person events, political insider newsletters, and a plethora of web content to keep you current, including Doathan human rights podcasts and feature stories. Whether you're a Frontier friend, follower, or fanatic, you can read the latest features published on the Frontier website. This week, they're about first-time voters at the military elections who describe being coerced into voting, and about the increase in deficient MBA programs being offered in Myanmar. Students are paying thousands for degrees that few institutions even recognize. Go to frontiermyanmar.net/en/membership. And now to our feature interview with human rights advocate Seng about the ongoing case against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. So some background here. In August 2017, the Myanmar military launched a campaign of what it called were clearance operations in Rakhine State after the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army attacked 9 security outposts in the state's north. The military and civilian mobs together killed thousands of Rohingya civilians and forced more than 730,000 to seek refuge over the nearby land border in Bangladesh. Zayed bin Ra'ad, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights at the time, described this as, quote, a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. But this push was just one part of much longer patterns of discrimination against the Rohingya in Myanmar. Now, the Rohingya have lived in the historical Arakan or Rakhine State area for centuries and are overwhelmingly Muslim in a Buddhist majority country. The Rohingya citizenship and rights have slowly been eroded over 6 decades of military rule in Myanmar, and especially since the Burma Socialist Program Party introduced its 1982 Citizenship Act. Today, many Rohingya people live without freedom of movement in camps in military-controlled Sitwe, the capital of Rakhine State. Others live in Arakan Army-controlled parts of the state, but most, over 1 million people, are stuck in underfunded refugee camps in Bangladesh, unable to return home as conflict continues between the Arakan Army, the Myanmar military, and Rohingya armed groups. The Arakan Army, which now controls most of Rakhine State, has also been accused of human rights abuses against Rohingya communities. Rohingya refugees regularly attempt dangerous boat journeys to foreign countries to escape this desperate situation, and UN data claims over 1,000 Rohingya people took these journeys just in the first 6 months of last year. This month, this whole situation is again front of mind for many parts of the international community as public hearings for the Gambia's case against the Myanmar state at the ICJ began on Monday, last week, January 12, and are planned to conclude on Thursday next week. However, the UN says that the court could take several months or longer to reach its final judgment. The Gambia first lodged its case against Myanmar in November 2019, and it accuses Myanmar of breaking the 1948 UN Genocide Convention in relation to the military's attacks on the Rohingya. Now, as the ICJ case has percolated along, the International Association of Genocide Scholars spoke out in 2020 to determine that the persecution of the Rohingya is genocide and crimes against humanity. The United States in 2022 also determined it to be genocide. Human rights groups still focus on the plight of the Rohingya with regular reports of fresh abuses, but international attention has really faded as other atrocities capture the attention in other parts of the world. Seng, you have spent years working on human rights documentation and advocacy in Myanmar, including on freedom of belief, which I mentioned because, of course, many people would say that the military's treatment of Rohingya people in Myanmar is at least partly religiously motivated. So I'm so happy to have you here. It's great. Hello.
Hi, everyone. This is Seng here.
So, Seng, it's been over 6 years since this case was first brought to the ICJ by the Gambia, and we're only just now hearing the arguments. Why has it taken so long?
Thank you for the question, Luke. Before I start with the delay in the process of the legal proceeding, I just wanted to give you a bit of the personal background a bit, because when I received the request to speak on this podcast, it just brought me back to my experience back in 2018. I was in Mandalay, in Sagan region, documenting the sort of like a quiet persecutions that doesn't really makes the global news. And I remember my time, sitting together with a father, speaking to him. His son was murdered, not by soldiers in the uniform, or the military, as we would call it. He was killed by an angry, extremist mob who are the neighbors, from, another village who have been living together with them, for many years. And the reason why he got killed is simply because, he belonged to, Islam, of Muslims, and that conversation really changed me, because that father didn't just lose his son. He lost his sense of belonging, to the country that he called his home. He asked me, please document this and tell the world, no matter how long it takes, and seek justice, for his boy. And I realized that the mob didn't just act on impulse, they were acting out on a really like a pattern of erasure. That is usually the narrative, written by the successive military regimes in the past few decades. So it is that horrific, script, that tells people it is okay, and it is actually a patriotic act to erase, those people who are different from you. And this is just a wake-up call to, a documenter like myself, and also for the people of Myanmar, because this isn't just a border security issue. This is something that is erasing people, physically, and also their mental connections as well. And I just wanted to connect this case, to this podcast today, because as I speak to you today, I remember him. And at the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, this is a space where we are not just to talk about the laws, and we are here to talk about the state's, responsibility for the very ideology, that it creates, which tells people and incite people, it is okay to kill somebody else, just for the sake of their, different religious, belonging, as well. So back to your question, why did it take so long? Why did it take until 2026 to really hear the story in the court? I would say it is, for many reasons. First of all, with the law, the international legal framework itself is designed in many layers, and the military representative use the arguments of, our legal standing. You can think of it as your permission, that you need, to enter the courtroom. Usually in the legal context, when you want to sue someone, you have to prove that you were the one that got hit by them, or like that they hurt you, So in the very beginning phase, 2019, when the Gambia, brought the case against, Myanmar, the Myanmar lawyers argued that the Gambia is a country thousands of miles away from, Myanmar, and they have like no citizens, in Myanmar, and so they are not like directly affected, by what has happened against the Rohingya. So therefore, they do not have that, legal standing to sue us. That is one of the reasons why, the case got stuck, at the preliminary hearing stage, for a while. But at the same time, like if you look at it from the Myanmar political, journey as well, we have COVID, and then in 2021, the military take over the country forcefully. And with that, it has become very, very confusing, and legally it's become very complicated in terms of who represent the Myanmar in the court as well. But, in 2021, we have seen that the court eventually decided that the military junta would represent the state. I just wanted to be very, very clear here. This is, not to give them the political legitimacy, but it is just a way of ensuring that, these military junta couldn't really use their own military coup as an excuse to run away from the trial. And since the state remained the state, it has to, take the responsibility and accountability of what it has done, against the Rohingya population. So the case has been, stuck at somewhere for a number of years. But in July 2022, I believe the court has made a decision which allows the Gambia to finally represent the case, and bring justice, against the Myanmar as a state, for the Rohingyas communities.
That's a really sad story, Seng, that you've led with there. But I want to ask another question about the sort of early background of the case. The Gambia, right? It might seem strange to listeners who are new to this that a West African country is involved at all in this. So why is the Gambia bringing this case against Myanmar?
There is a Gambia former Attorney General, and the Minister of Justice, Tambaudo. I'm not quite sure if I'm pronouncing, his name correctly, but he is a former prosecutor at the, International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. From what we know and what we learned, his visit to Cox's Bazar in 2018, at the refugee camps in Bangladesh, listening to hundreds of victims, and survivors, testimony. That was the sort of like a moment that he realized the pattern, of the systemic, persecutions, which was bringing him flashback to, what he has seen in Rwanda as well. And he would want to, bring it to the court. So that was this kind of like the moral choice he made. I would say it is not Gambia alone that kind of like involved, and built the case. But, there is the role of, OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperations, which has been supporting the case because Gambia is a part of the OIC. And the OIC, together with their, moral connections and also with the support of the OIC member states, I remember they have assigned the Gambia to lead the case against Myanmar. That was sort of, as I remember, how Gambia, started to get involved with the case.
Thanks so much, Seng. That's really interesting. Now, I want to ask you about what's been happening in the courtroom. The Gambia's arguments have leaned heavily on reports and data from human rights organizations and the UN. That's their evidence. This must be quite gratifying for you, right? You're someone who's worked in human rights documentation, and to see this stuff being put to use at such an important forum, that's great. But there's also been some leaked internal military documents. But what do you think? Have you found this case compelling? Do you think the Gambia is taking the right approach? Do they have any kind of smoking gun they can point to? Or is it more about building up this accumulation of separate facts to make the case?
What we are seeing is, as I have explained to you earlier, there are many layers, and the first layer being, the legal standing. And we have successfully, bypassed that barriers. Now we are moving on to a merit phase. To simply put it, it is just a question of, did it actually happen in the context of law? This is exactly, where the ICJ judges, to look for a smoking gun, which is a direct and undeniable, a proof. But to be very, very realistic, such kind of like a smoking gun sort of evidences are very rare because for a regime like a military junta, they have been taking control of Myanmar for the past 70 years. And for such a regime, they are not that careless. So what we have to see, and what we have to, check here is the alternative smoking guns, which will lead to that, directions. So what we have to unpack here is the kind of like a language. It can be a coded language, so we have to uncode that language, here. So if they don't say like there is no order, they don't say like kill these Rohingyas. There is an alternative, that we can look for, which is a clearance operation, which is basically the order that they have put. And maybe they don't say like erase the whole, a Rohingya community, in their order or in their discussions. But from what I have seen, the Gambia legal team has put forward and submitted is the leaked documents, and minutes where there are records of meeting the military top generals, I believe, including Min Online, discuss about the demographic imbalance and having the Rohingya as an existential threat. These are the language that we have to look for. And then in terms of the map as well, because we have seen the evidences that once the villages are burned from the satellite imagery, the military immediately bulldoze those graveyard and homes and turn it into military bases. So the Gambia is in a way building mosaics of proof, which is, if you think of 1,000 piece of puzzle, then one piece is a satellite photo of a village that got turned into the ash. And then another case would be, could be another evidence could be a witness, testimony of what they have suffered, like mass rape, for example. And then another, things that could add up to the evidence as well is the Facebook campaigns of, hatred that could trace back to the psychological warfare, and stuff like that. So these are, some of the pieces that we can put together, especially for the Gambia team. As I see it, they are trying to put together those pieces and trying to build a picture that can only be interpreted as a genocide, because there are arguments from the military, that this is simply like a border security and they are just fighting the terrorists. But if you were to, fight the terrorists, you have to let the civilian go back to their homes, after, you have, done this process. And this isn't about, the border security, because the way they have, bulldozed those graveyards and built the military bases and didn't really leave a room and space for the civilian to actually return, and this erasure of their whole history and the whole community, it is the Gambia team trying to build, this intention, the very intention that's very important for the genocide, cases as well. So yeah, for now, this is what I can tell you.
Well, like you say, proving genocide requires establishing patterns by peoples, by communities. It requires a temporal element too. It happens over time. It's not an instant thing.
Yeah.
So is the Gambia doing a good job at explaining this? Or do you think it's leaning too heavily into just the human rights data and testimonies from only 2017?
Using the, the human rights, reports and also the evidences from 2017 is helping, the court to realize that the military is going beyond what is necessary for a war. It is collective, part of like an evidences that the Gambia has put forward, because it is really important to understand how judges in ICJ in the previous cases has addressed this, similar kind of like a genocidal, pattern, especially with the Serbia and Bosnia, genocide cases, because there is always this route of like an alternative, explanation to what is happening right now in Myanmar, because the ICJ use the only reasonable inference or rule. What it means is the court can only, find the Myanmar guilty of genocide if genocidal intent is the only way to explain why they did it. And what we are seeing with the Myanmar, counter argument, or like the defense, as you would call it, is that they are using that alternative, loophole. And they say that, yes, people die, but, we weren't trying to destroy a group, but we are just fighting a war against the ASA terrorists. And if the judge think the war explanations is maybe a bit more like reasonable, then they might end up with acquitting the state of genocide. So this is sort of like a high bar, and that is also the same rule that has allowed some perpetrator in Bosnian genocides to really go free, after, on some specific charges as well. So it is really important for us to break that, loophole. And in my perspective, the Gambia team is trying to, put together, like evidences, not only from the human rights, like documentation, even though, this would really play a role, but there is, also other evidences that they have submitted, which is through close, door, the survivor, testimonial process, which will really, play an important role, because to sort of differentiate, the war crimes and also this, genocides, there are some, arguments that they have put forward is the targeting of infants, children, and also, the reproductive violence that the Myanmar military has committed. Because if you think about it, killing a baby or like a children, why would you do it? Because it doesn't really stop a terrorist. It just only did one thing, which is ending the future of a group. And if the Gambia could present evidences of infants, being thrown into like fires, which have been like documented by the human rights groups, or like a reproductive violence that has been committed against thousands of women, then this is showing the court that the war explanations is no longer reasonable. And the only reasons that is left to, or like fit to call it would be like a genocide. So in a way, they are building the case to show the judges that not only the case of like the paper trail or other things are important, but there are other parts of the case that needs to be considered together, to really decide whether this is there's a intention for the genocides or not. So in my perspective, the Gambia team is doing a good job, which is not very easy.
Not easy at all. And the same goes for the military delegation. I mean, what are they doing? What's their strategy? The military delegation has refused to use the name Rohingya so far. They've referred to the victims of 2017 only as Bengalis. The ICJ, though, is using the term Rohingya. It recognizes the people as a protected group. That's why this trial is going ahead. So what's the military doing sticking to saying Bengali, even in the court? I mean, one would think that refusing to refer to the Rohingya by their own self-identification, erasing the name and the language in the court, one would think that only increases the power of the Gambia's case, that there is a hate campaign behind this genocide.
Of course, this is something that we have to be like documenting. Plus, like I'm sure like the Gambia team will also argue this as well, because this state-run kind of like a hate, campaign, itself started with the very, identity, part, where the name, the erasure of the name, the wording itself, like a Rohingyas, the state is arguing that by not using, the Rohingyas, name, they are not a protected group, under the Genocide Convention. But they wanted to, in my perspective, this is, something, that the Myanmar military side wanted to, emphasize, that they are just an unauthorized foreigners to Myanmar. So they have no name. So they have no rights, which is, actually good for us, because, good for us in a way that, and also for the Gambia team, that this kind of like erasure is not only happening at the physical level, but also the intent, is going towards this, a whole, the identity, erasures as well.
And quickly, what about the rest of the military delegation's claims that there isn't enough evidence of widespread violence against civilians, that too much weight is being put on anonymous witness testimony, They say the Gambia's evidence is partisan, that it's from outsiders at a distance who weren't there in Rakhine State. Is there anything of merit to this in the court, do you think?
If you look at it, there are attempts from international, accountability mechanisms, such as like a fact-finding missions and IIMs, which have requested, for on-site sort of, investigation processes, and that got like denied. When it comes to, the survival testimonial as well, from the very, principle of the survivor center, approach to, protecting the witnesses and also the survivor, if you look at the intensity and the skill of the atrocities that has been committed by the, military, the protections of witnesses and survivor, must be put into place, because if not, there is a whole, consequences of retaliations, and also in terms of the power dynamic as well. If you are put out front to challenge, the very perpetrator that has committed, crimes against you, the power dynamics and the power balance is not going to be there. So their claim that, the evidences did not really meet the standards, of an international code, it is baseless. But from the Gambia sides and also other, state member state that has been supporting, the Gambia, we have to, really come up with, other, evidences, other elements of evidences that could, argue them back as well. And I'm sure, the Gambia team can come up with, counter arguments to address this.
All right, a vote of confidence there. Now let's, to finish, let's head out of the courtroom and look at Myanmar society a little bit more broadly. Media outlet Myanmar Now reported this week that Buddhist nationalist monks are planning to hold a rally in Yangon this coming Monday to support the military regime's delegation at the ICJ. The monks are apparently former members of the ultra-nationalist network known as Mabata, which was very influential throughout the 2010s, but was formally dissolved by the NLD administration in 2017. These organisers are planning or hoping that there will be similar rallies right across the country on the same day. Some of the monks attending have organised protests in past years complaining about the use of the term Rohingya, about the existence of Islamic schools in Myanmar, and some marched in support of the 2021 coup. So since this podcast started in 2024, we haven't yet had a chance to cover the infamous Mabata. Seng, could you please describe who the Mabata are and why these planned protests next week could be quite dangerous?
Mabata itself, it is a group of religious extremists, not only like from the religious, like a perspective, but also from the community itself, based on a very common census that they have to protect the patriotic identity of being a Buddhist, Burma in Myanmar. And we have seen, in the past, with all the Mabata communities trying to be a part of like the tool that has been used by the military in their hate campaigns against the Rohingya communities as well. So Mabata is a Burmese acronym for the Committee for the Protections of Race and Religion, and that has sort of grown out of the 969s movement, I would say. For those people who may not know, Mabata, there is a very famous, or like infamous, our leader is the monk Ashinwiyartu. What I have seen is they have put together, a very discriminatory, a religious law, a pack of law, which is called like Race and Religion Law in 2015, that restricts the religious conversion, the interfaith marriages, and also in terms of one of the intents of erasure, which is, to control the birth rates of the Rohingya communities as well. And these laws are particularly designed to target the Muslim community. So with those, spreading of the narrative of Buddhism under attack by the Islam, they have been calling the Rohingyas the invaders, the cockroaches, and the psychological warfare that, IIMM has submitted as an evidences, has explicitly, mentioned that as well. And the very slogan I believe, is the Amyo Bada Tatana, which is a Burmese, term, simply put in English is a race, language, and religion. For you to become a true Burmese, with being a Buddhist, you need to protect that, race, language, and religions. So, in a way, this has discriminated and cast, Christian, Muslim, Hindus as a foreigner in the land that they call it home. So with the current ongoing ICJ process, they do have historically act as a political tool for the military, because even though they have been officially banned by the NLD, the National League for Democracy governments in 2017, they have rebranded themselves as a Buddha Dhamma Prahita Foundations, and we have seen a massive resurgence of them since the 2021, coup, and the junta has released their leaders from the prisons, and this is actually becoming very, I think, horrific, and this patterns and motive, for the militaries, means in a way is linking them, the Mabata, a group of Mabata, and other, military-backed militias like Pusoti, which is basically, military, supported, armed militias group. The threats of the protests around this acknowledging, the Myanmar, legal defense team, which is basically led by Gogo Line, at the ICJ, is a significant pressure for people, to counter, their sort of like a support, towards the military in country, because what we have seen, from the news is they come up with the slogan, we stand with the country, and it is a narrative where it is designed to blur the line between the military and the state, and they argue that the genocidal verdict, could actually, stain the whole entire population, not just the general, is a really, important part of the narrative that we have to counter as people working, in the documentation fields and people working for the vulnerable populations, because this is not an attack against the, Myanmar, even if, the ICJ, process ended with victory for the Rohingya community, that this is not attack against the, people of Myanmar. This is, against the military, generals, who have committed those crimes. So this is something that we have to, as a civil society, to counter those, arguments and also the narrative as well. So I think this is the time for, communities and civil society to come up, together to, counter this.
Now, the regime actually released a statement just on Wednesday urging the protesters attending these events to avoid writing or speaking in a manner that appears to criticize, denigrate, or attempt to influence the ICJ. It also directed protesters away from using, quote, racially discriminatory language in speeches and Facebook posts and placards. Quote, when referring to groups not recognized as indigenous ethnic races of the country, don't use that name in a way that constitutes hate speech. Do you think that these warnings means that the military is aware of the optics of how these protests could actually maybe spark blowback abroad and jeopardize their arguments at the ICJ? But then I also want to ask, if the protests did get out of hand, would the military actually do anything? Are Buddhist nationalists simply too important, too much a source of support for the military's control of politics?
Yeah, this is a really good question. The way they have framed it around the setting some of the rules, in terms of supporting to the military, with the caveat that you can't really use this or that. This is definitely an indication that the military are aware of what they are doing, and especially in terms of the military, I would say those people who are supporting the military technically from the behind the door, like the legal team, or like even there are like advisors that the military have been supported with. I'm not quite sure if if people know that, but the lawyers that got involved in a part of a Myanmar legal defense team is also a pretty famous lawyer, with his arguments being crafted in a, I would say, like a punchy way, towards against the Gambias as well. Some of those people, have the experience of the UN, and also even, with the international relations as well. So this is something where the optic would, go in a way that could, backfire them, if they use, such and such, languages as well. So this is, I agree, with your perspective, on that one. This is, I think, like a kind of like a test, that the military has to take it, in its own way, because from the previous, like, incidences, why we are here today, at the ICJ is the very reason why military hasn't really taken a step, forward and like hold those people, especially the, nationalist mob, like the one that I have tell you in the very beginning with the story of a father. This is the reason why, the mob violences got out of the hands, and become a communal violence that has set, the pattern of repressions and oppression throughout the countries. And what we have seen is those, nationalists, or ultra-nationalist Mabada group were never taken, any actions against their what they have done, against the, the religious minority communities. But it will be very interesting, to see if, the military, at least, for the sake of a reputation, because this is something that they have been trying to earn, the legitimacy from the international community, and they even hold up this, the election, alongside this, the ICJ process as well, as you can see. It will be very interesting if, the military actually want to step in case if that mob, become a violence, a pattern of violence, as well. But I don't believe that the military will actually step in to actually take the legal, actions against these people. If for the sake of people, they might bring one or two people, which may not be necessarily hold a powerful position, in the Mabada or like a Pusoti, group, like what we have seen, with the previous cases in 2025, where they have taken, some actions against the mob people in the, Pusoti and Mabata, for criticizing against them. But, as long as, these, Mabata and Pusoti groups are supporting, them, I don't think they would sacrifice those groups for the sake of international, reputations. That's my perspective.
Okay, Seng. Now, this is the last question. You've given us so much of your time. I really value it. Thank you so much. Let's finish with an easy one. So, if the Gambia and the Rohingya community is successful and Myanmar is found guilty in this case at the ICJ, what could happen from that? And then, if they fail and the military regime is vindicated, what would that mean?
You said it's like an easy question, but it's not really easy, I guess, because the very verdict that we want is the victory for the persecuted Rohingya community, and that has to come with a list of like a reparation. And as you can see, the Gambia team has put out like the list of reparations that they would like to request from Myanmar, or in their arguments as well. Basically, this includes the right to belong, which is to repeal the 1982 citizenship law, because under that law the Rohingyas are basically stateless and they cannot return to their own country. So repealing this law would be one of the things that serve as a reparation for the Rohingya. And the other thing is safe and dignified return, meaning that they go back to their home, their original home, not to IDP camps. And then the other thing that is most important, in my perspective, is the acknowledgement from the state which has committed the crime, that they need to admit what they did against the Rohingya. So in a way, this will serve as a symbolic justice, for them as well. And this is something that I can clearly see as a sort of like a reset button to bring justice for the Rohingya community if we win the case. But it will comes with a lot of responsibility to the people of Myanmar, because I just wanted to repeat that. Forget about like the propaganda and the narrative from the military that this is attack on our country. No, this is not. This is actually the way the Gambia has put forward these cases, because we need to challenge the system of impunity. And we need to, for us to build, a federal democracy, where people like, the 16-year-old boy that I mentioned, regardless of his fate, people doesn't need to fear, their angry neighbors, again. For us to do that, we need to, win this case. So this is, one perspective. But what if we lost the case? Actually, I didn't want to think about it, but realistically speaking, we have to, see, what will happen with this case. But if we lost, this, case during a judgment, we will have to, see the other way around, where we can, still pursue justice, for the survivor community, the victims community that has suffered throughout the decades, which will be, the International Criminal Court, where the ICJ is, judging the state. The ICC, with the ICC, we can go after the individuals. And we have seen that there's a arrest warrant has been requested for Min Aung Hlaing. So we have to find our ground from there. And then, how do we, build up the case against, because this is not the end of the justice pathway. There are other, justice, mechanisms with the Argentina universal jurisdiction cases, and also another case that was just tried, in Timor-Leste, is the universal jurisdiction, cases for Chin communities that has been brought about by the Chin human rights organizations as well. So, of course, it will be harder, for us, with the decisions, in terms of rather than we in terms of a verdict, I would say rather than we lost the case, it will be more in a sense that rather than a guilty verdict, it will be sort of the loophole that I have mentioned to you earlier. Maybe it might ended up with a verdict that the case that Gambia has brought about is not a case of genocide, but maybe another alternative explanations that fits another alternative explanations which would actually rest with the deliberations of the ICJ judges. So yeah, for now that's all I can think of.
Well, human rights work is never done, and will continue
Exactly.
whichever way the ICJ rules.
Exactly.
Seng, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much for coming on What's Happening in Myanmar, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. So thank you for having me, and I hope it's a helpful podcast. Thank you.
Okay, so as mentioned, this Sunday is the third phase of voting for the military's so-called elections. Media outlets have put out a slew of analyses since the voting first began on December 28. They nearly all point in the same direction. The elections were never designed to be free or fair. The USDP will win overall, and the position that coup leader Min Aung Hlaing takes in the new power structure, which he will apparently grandly declare to the public in March, that position will determine how the country's political crisis evolves in 2026. How will the National Unity Government, ethnic armed organisations, and post-coup armed groups respond to the new configuration of military and civilian power at the centre, beyond just pointing out that the election was a sham? Will new powerful countries recognise the newly rebranded military regime? Time will tell. Thank you for sticking to the end of What's Happening in Myanmar this week. Remember, you can email the show at whrmyanmar@proton.me. Until next episode, farewell and take care.